What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel. I am joined today by Justin Lorber, also known as Future Dodgers. And Justin is here because the MLB Draft is right around the corner. It begins on Sunday night, incorporated into All-Star Week this week. Justin, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited. We got 19 picks this week, and should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, we got lots to get to, so I'm extended that normally when you and I talk, it's like 15 minutes. We're going to extend that out to about 45 today, and here's the plan. We're going to dive into the draft. Before we get that, we'll get to a little bit of a farm system update, especially in light of the team's new starting pitching need. We'll talk prospects who might be trade bait. Then we'll get into the draft. You can kind of talk us through some names that have been connected to the Dodgers, some guys you like, and we'll close with some mailbag questions on Twitter. But I'll start with the question, the guys already in the organization, and the question that I think most Dodger fans are probably asking, and one that you maybe more than anyone else are prepared to answer, which is, in short, if Clayton Kershaw is hurt, what's the plan? Bauer is out indefinitely. The Dodgers down to 3 major league starters at the moment. Josiah Gray's getting stretched out, probably a few weeks away. David Price might be getting stretched out, probably a couple weeks away. If you were in charge, knowing the farm system, what would you do? Are there guys that are ready to fill that need at the lower levels or the upper levels of the Dodger minor league system?
I think there are guys who could fill that need, but if we're talking, well, we don't know right now what the outlook for Clayton Kershaw looks like. With regard to Trevor Bauer, I don't think he pitches again this season. That's the sense I get.
Yeah.
So I think if you're looking, ahead, you need another impact starter. I think that was true before Kershaw went on the IL. I think that's even more true now. And I don't necessarily know, or I don't think that the Dodgers will know before July 30th, whether they have one of those guys internally. Josiah Gray, as you mentioned, threw 2 innings. I believe that was on July 4th. So that was last Sunday. So he should start again soon. But he threw a 3rd in the bullpen. But they want to get him up to 75 pitches before they bring him up to the major leagues. That's going to take a few weeks. Yeah. Ryan Pepiot, who's been phenomenal at AA, I think he's got to get maybe like a month in at AAA first. And I think if he does come up, he's more likely a relief option later in the year. Andre Jackson, Gerardo Carrillo, both on the 40-man. Neither has been phenomenal. At least not like Ryan Pepiot at AA.
Yeah.
I think if you were to pick one, you need a guy for 4 innings who's on the 40-man. Andre Jackson would be the guy over Carrillo. Edwin Yasetta has not had a lot of major league success. I think he really just needs more AAA seasoning. With the lost season last year, he probably would have been at AAA. Probably should be there full time this year, but the Dodgers pitching needs have dictated otherwise.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're going to get away from the answer of we need to go get someone externally, and whether that's a big name like a Max Scherzer or a Jose Barrios from the Twins, or it's a smaller name. I personally like John Gray on the Rockies a lot. He's a rental. I think he's still injured right now, but who knows if the Rockies would even trade with the Dodgers. But he's a guy who I would probably go after in terms of cost and possible impact. Kyle Gibson on the Twins, or on the Rangers, used to be on the Twins, maybe as well. But yeah, I think that the answer here is probably going to be an external one, especially if this Kershaw injury ends up being more serious than it appears right now.
Yeah, because we got spoiled, right, with like Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin, those guys sort of making the transition as seamlessly as they did. I mean, Tony Gonsolin has a career ERA under 3. He never had the struggling. Now, he was older than a lot of the guys that we're talking about, which is the difference. So it does sound like that internally maybe, there's some guys that could eat innings, but yeah, like you said, if the aspirations are World Series, none of those guys are guys that you necessarily trust in a pennant race in a big game or especially in the playoffs. So you didn't mention one name that I'll just toss out. We can talk more about trade, but Kenta Maeda is another name that's been thrown out on a team that's struggling, a guy the Dodgers are familiar with. And we know he didn't love his role that the Dodgers had for him, but if they have a desperate need for a starter, and if the alternative is playing on a crappy team that's not even going to make the playoffs, maybe Kenta would be interested. But we won't hash that one out. That's for another show, another podcast. So let me get to the second prospect question for you. We've covered some of the risers of this last year a few weeks ago when we chatted. Some news that's come out is Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus both announced some new midseason prospect lists. BP did a top 50, Baseball America a top 100. The headline to me, and you can take this wherever you want, was Miguel Vargas. He was rated by Baseball Prospectus as the Dodgers' top prospect, 38th overall, one spot ahead of Keibert Ruiz. Josiah Gray was not in their top 50 after being 55th before the year. Vargas not even in Baseball America's top 100. So where do you stand on Vargas, and were there any other surprises in some of the midseason prospect ranking updates that you've seen?
I guess I'll answer these questions in reverse. I don't really see any surprises here in terms of performance. Guys who've done well have moved up. A lot of that is also because guys have graduated. That's just the natural cycle of prospect rankings. Guys graduate, guys move up. So no surprises, I think. And with regard to Vargas, for some people that might be, wow, I didn't know he was that highly regarded. Baseball Prospectus has always been the high publication on him consistently. I think he's been a top 100 prospect for them for a while now. So they've been high on him consistently. It's not surprising that when he's taken this jump and added power, now that they're even higher on him. And the power is legit. I think he came into this year with 9 home runs in 2 years. He's hit 13 in half a season. And that's playing as a 21-year-old at high A, below the league average, and a 21-year-old at double A. He has 6 homers, I think, in like 19 games at double A. And he's, I think, 3 or so years younger than the league average player. He's the youngest player on Tulsa's active roster. So the stuff that he has done this year, I think, is evidence of the work that he's put in, because he's always been a great hitter. He's just never been able to get to that power. And it's why I think, a lot of people, including myself, were hesitant about, ranking him so highly, because he plays corner infield and those guys have to hit for power most of the time. And now that he's showing that, and he hasn't really lost the hit tool, he's still hitting well. It just projects really, really well for his future profile. And I think he certainly looks like a major leaguer.
Now, if you were going to re-rank, is Ruiz, is Gray, who would you have as the top maybe 2 or 3 prospects in the system in sort of in your world?
Number 1 for me would be Ruiz.
Okay.
I had a number 2 the start of the year. Here, I can pull this up. Number 1, I would go Ruiz. And number 2, someone I haven't mentioned yet, at least in this show today, Andy Pages. The power he's shown has been amazing. Eric Longenhagen of Fangraphs has called him the launch angle unicorn, which I just love that nickname. And I think the upside with him is so high with his ability to lift the ball and drive the ball in the air for power. Good defender, probably a right field defender, but certainly a plus arm in right field. Probably can play a little bit of center field too if needed. And then number 3, I would say Josiah Gray.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know we don't need to break down each of these lists, but Gray, I think maybe some Dodger fans like me that sort of just check in on these every 6 months might be surprised that Gray isn't higher, but I'm guessing just the injury and the lack of pitching that he has done in the last 6 months is probably the reason why he's maybe not rising as quickly as some of these other guys. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. This is much more, Ruiz and Pages have been incredible this year than it is, Josiah Gray's not a major league starting pitcher anymore. He still is, but he's been hurt in his 2 starts, his first one of the year and his most recent, his first start back. He's looked great. So, it's not like he's done anything to move himself down. He just hasn't pitched, and those guys have been great.
Fair. Okay. 2 more prospect questions before we get to the draft. The first is some folks asked when we put out a call for questions on Twitter, maybe just sort of a breakdown of going level by level and through the Dodgers system. Maybe some names that have caught your eye, guys that are rising, that kind of thing. Kind of take that wherever you want, but just looking AAA, AA, high A, etc. What are some names that have jumped out and caught your attention so far?
At AAA, I think it's got to be Ruiz. The power that he's shown, 13 homers, and if you include his major league homer, that's a career high. And we're in early July, and the minor leagues didn't start until May.
Yeah. Crazy. So
he's already at a career high. And the thing is, he always hit the ball well. He always struck out at a low rate. He's still doing that. He actually has more walks than strikeouts this year. He's striking out at an 11% rate as a 22-year-old catcher in AAA. That's just, those guys do not come around often. And when you add in that, now he's hitting for power. I don't know if you saw the homer he hit last night, or if anyone watching this saw the homer he hit last night. Hit the ball off the scoreboard, and the scoreboard's like 50 feet in the air above the right field fence. He is crushing homers. These are not, little wall scrapers that are just getting over the fence. He is crushing the ball. And that's just something he hasn't really done consistently before.
Got it.
So he's been the highlight at AAA. Zach Retz has also been very good. I would have liked to see him get more of a chance in the majors, but now that guys are healthy, probably not going to happen unless more guys go on the injured list. Moving down to AA, Miguel Vargas, who moved up, only a few weeks ago, has been probably their best hitter over that time period. Michael Busch was hurt. He got hit by a pitch, I think somewhere on his arm, was out for about a week, struggled a little bit after that, starting to pick it back up as well. He hit a huge homer a few days ago, well beyond the right field fence. Yeah. Moved down to high A, already talked about Andy Pages, 16 homers. I think that's top 5 in the minor leagues as a 20-year-old in high A. Only a 27% strikeout rate, which I think is good considering his profile. Yeah. He's going to be a power swing and miss guy. So striking out at a 27% rate as a 20-year-old in high A, and he's walking 11% at the time too. I think you definitely take that. If he's not going above 30%, I'd say that's pretty good for his profile and his age. Leonel Valera has been very good as well, also at high A. He turns 22 today, but 12 homers, 12 stolen bases this year. The strikeout rate has been high, 33% as it stands today. A little worrisome, but he's certainly moved himself up this year. Moving down to low A, Johnny DeLuca, who was an Oregon guy.
Go Ducks, baby.
So
Go Ducks. They're all over the place. Jake Reed up in the majors. Mike Clevenger, not Mike Clevenger. Garrett Clevenger. We got two Ducks on the major league rosters. This is a big day. I'm not expecting Jake Reed to stick around all that long, but hey, we got to celebrate it while he's there.
Yeah, agreed. Johnny DeLuca has been really good. 13% walk rate, 19% strikeout rate, hitting for power. I think he has double-digit homers and stolen bases. 140 weighted runs created plus, which is top 10 in that league. Another guy who is top 10 in the league in average homers, weighted runs created plus, and OPS is Eddie Leonard, who is a 20-year-old middle infielder. Was one of the more notable signings a few years ago, back when the Dodgers were still limited to $300,000 bonuses before they got out of that probationary period, and that was under the old rules. He's kind of been under the radar, but he has been great this year, especially the last month or so. I think, he's last month or so, something like a 185 weighted runs created plus, which for those who don't know that stat, it's a speed adjusted and park adjusted stat that attempts to show how much better a player has been compared to the league average player, which is 100. So over the last month, he's been about 85% better than league average.
Crazy.
And that is,
for middle infielder.
If you were to put that guy in the major leagues, that would be top 5. The top 5 major leaguers usually are something between like 160 and 170 every year.
Love it.
And on the pitching side, I talked about Ryan Pepio. He's dominated. I think he's ready for AAA. The AA hitters just haven't really been a challenge for him. He's allowed 17 hits in 41 innings. Wow. He has actually allowed more walks than hits. He's allowed 18 walks, which is not terrible in 41 innings, especially when he's struck out 57 guys. But he's just been too good for the level. I think it's time that he moves up. Bobby Miller has also been very, very good as advertised. I think even a little better than advertised in high A. Someone who I think should see AA by the end of the year when some of those AA arms like Pepio and Andre Jackson start to move up to AAA. And Landon Knack, the Dodgers' second-round pick last year, back-to-back scoreless starts. So started the year on the injured list, has been building up over his last few starts, 6 scoreless innings in his last start. He's going, full starts now, not just shorter stints, and it's great to see.
Love it. Well, I mean, as you go through these names, it leads to probably the next obvious question that fans want to ask. We're talking about, hey, the Dodgers need starting pitching. We're talking about all these prospects the Dodgers have. Let's bridge those two conversations and say, as trade talks pick up, are there names to watch? Are there guys that might be of interest to other teams? Are there positions of depth the Dodgers can trade from? Like we talked last time about how the Dodgers have they don't have any pitchers that are right at the major league level quite yet, like Josiah Gray, Ryan Pepio, probably guys that are like best case scenario, like a year away from really being solid contributors there. And yet they have this glut of starting pitching where like clearly they're not going to have room for all of these guys if they progress. So are there names to watch for you? Are there guys that might be of interest? And is starting pitching maybe a position, catching obviously another, maybe where the Dodgers have an abundance of talent in a certain position with no obvious pathway forward?
Possibly. If you're talking about prospects who could be traded in the Dodgers system, that conversation has to start with Keibert Ruiz. Whether you want him traded or not. And I think there's a misconception here with Will Smith and Keibert Ruiz. The Dodgers don't have to trade Keibert Ruiz because Will Smith is there.
Yeah.
I don't even think the Dodgers should trade Keibert Ruiz because Will Smith is there. Will Smith being there just means that they can trade Keibert Ruiz. And Ruiz has been good. We just talked about how good he's been this year. But to kind of conceptualize how good Will Smith is at the major league level, he has been above average on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. Offensively, he's been elite. I think he's second in WAR among catchers, only behind Buster Posey.
Yeah. And
he's doing all this as a 26-year-old who I think just played his 162nd major league game. So he just now got in, what is equivalent to a full season of games. And if you look at that line, at age 26, you can probably say, okay, this guy's going to do this for another few years. The Dodgers are better set up from a catching position just with him than I think any other team in the league. Because if you look across the league, you look at the top catchers, the guys who can contribute above average on both sides of the ball, it's a short list. And the majority of the guys on those lists are older. They're more expensive.
Yeah.
Will Smith is not a free agent until after the 2025 season. The Dodgers are set up great. But that doesn't mean that they have to trade Keibert Ruiz. It just means that they can. And I'm not even sure they should, because when you can roll out a guy who is above average on both sides of the ball at catcher, just those guys are so rare every day, because as we know, catchers don't play every day, not like other positions. I think they've gone like 2 out of every 3 games with Will Smith and Austin Barnes this year. And when you can put one of those guys in your starting lineup every day, and assuming next year a lot of people expect that the universal DH will be here, there are ways to get those guys at bats. So I don't think that they have to trade Ruiz. If the right deal comes up, especially now that they need a starter, they definitely need a starter. Then they need an impact starter. Ruiz might be a guy that they, have to just swallow it and say, well, we got to go to a starter because we want to win.
Yeah.
But he's been good enough, and I think that they can make it work where they don't have to trade him.
I think, Cartaya is part of that conversation too, right? Because it's not just, hey, they have Will Smith, but it's also like there are some people that think the best catcher in the Dodgers organization, as far as long-term, when we look back on this 50 years from now, is actually the guy that we haven't mentioned, which is Diego Cartaya. Now, he's further away. He's a few years younger than Keibert Ruiz, but that's the other piece, is that you have Will Smith under contract for a number of years, but also Keibert Ruiz is, even if you think he's maybe 2 or 3 years away from being able to contribute at the major league level, and that might be on the early side, I think that is the other data point in the conversation about trading Ruiz. Not to mention, and they've got other guys like Carson Taylor, right? Don't they have another catcher who is, somewhat highly regarded. So they have a level of depth, not only at the high end, but also below Ruiz, that I think is a data point. I'm with you. I'm not saying they need to trade him. He's worthless to the Dodgers, that kind of thing, because of the DH and because of, he's going to, even if there's no DH, you need somebody to play 50 games a year to back up Will Smith. So combined with the DH, letting Will Smith play 162, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Cartaya is a piece of the conversation as well. Saying not to say they should trade Cartaya, but that trading Ruiz maybe becomes more palatable knowing that Cartaya is behind him.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a data point that's useful. I think it's important to remember as well, Diego Cartaya is 19.
Yeah.
He's at low A. Catching prospects are extremely volatile. They can be. But he would make that also a little easier. Carson Taylor, who you brought up, the 4th-round pick from last year, has been really good at high A this year. Started off slow, has been just, I think like 50% better than league average offensively since, like mid-May, walking more than he's striking out, although that was something that we expected. He had a high walk rate in college too. So they have catching depth. As I've said before on this show and others, you'd be hard-pressed to find a team with a better catching situation throughout the entire organization than the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Let me ask you this. Would you rather trade Cartaya or Ruiz if you had to pick one?
It depends on the deal. They're valued differently, and it would depend on.
Do you think there's a huge gap? Is Ruiz like massively more valuable in trades in your estimation than Cartaya?
Yes,
Okay.
because Ruiz can come up and contribute
Yeah,
to
he
a
could play
major league
tomorrow.
team right now.
Yeah,
Obviously, the AAA West is an offensive-oriented league.
sure.
So you have to contextualize what he's doing there with, offense is going to be bigger here than in most leagues. But still, you contextualize that like with rated runs created plus, which does that,
Yeah.
and he's 38% better than league average.
Yeah. Fair. Well, what about some other names? I mean, Ruiz is the obvious one. And, if you start talking about some of these bigger names, like, the Cubs are going to be sellers. Well, if the Dodgers wanted to go out and try and get a Kyle Hendricks or a Craig Kimbrell or a Chris Bryant or Barrios, who you mentioned, those types of guys, Ruiz is the first name that's going to come up. I'm not saying it's fair value or any of that, but are there other names to watch? Other guys that you're like, keep an eye on these 2 to 3 guys as guys maybe other organizations might value more than the Dodgers, or just, hey, they play a position, there's not an obvious pathway, they're expendable in the Dodgers' eyes?
So I think looking at how they have acted in the past with regard to trading prospects for major league players, there are 2 guys who kind of stand out to me. And the first one is a guy I mentioned before, Leonel Valera. Has really had a breakout year this year, added a lot of power. I mentioned the strikeouts are a big concern. And as a middle infielder, if you look at the level above him, if you look at AA, you've got Kenta Maeda there who, might not be a superstar, but I think, he struggled a little bit this year. I think he still should be a major league bench bat, a utility infielder, something like that. I still think he gets there at least if he's not a major league starter. Yeah. And then you look at the level below that in low A. I mentioned Eddie Leonard has been doing great. Yorvit Vivas has been hitting really well. Alex De Jesus, been up and down, but a very highly regarded prospect, probably the highest regarded prospect out of those 3 at low A. So Dodgers, and I should mention Wilman Diaz, arguably the top international prospect from last year's class. He's in the Dominican Summer League, so he's much further away. But in terms of talent level, he should move quickly.
Yeah.
So the Dodgers have traded guys with big breakouts before. If you look at the Manny Machado trade, Dean Kramer and Rylan Bannon, 2 of the prospects in that trade, and Yusniel Diaz, the headliner of that trade, were having huge years, really big breakout years at the time of the trade. And, part of that is obvious as well. Of course, the team wants to trade for a guy on the upswing. And of course, the Dodgers aren't going to trade someone when they're at their lowest value if they think that player's better.
Yeah.
So, of course, that makes sense that they would want to, quote unquote, sell high. But with Valera, I think the strikeouts are a concern. You have guys in the middle infield above and below him, even if they're not necessarily shortstops.
Yeah.
You have guys out in those positions above and below him. And, he is someone who I think that other teams would be attracted to because of the power that he's brought this year from the middle infield.
Yeah.
So I think he is someone who, I'm not saying they should trade him, but I think based on how they've acted in the past, could be someone that they decide to move.
Yeah.
And then the last guy I'll talk about here is Kendall Williams, who they acquired last year as the bigger piece in the Ross Stripling trade. And the reason he's on there is not because of performance or anything like that. It's because when the Dodgers have acquired, decent prospects from other teams, under Andrew Friedman, which they've done quite a few times for being a contending team. They've acquired highly regarded prospects quite a few times before. And almost every single one of them they have traded. Andrew Heaney, acquired in the Dan Herron, D. Gordon trade, traded immediately to the Angels for Howie Kendrick. Jeter Downs, acquired in that Reds trade, moved for Mookie Betts. Frankie Montas, acquired from the White Sox in that from the White Sox in that 3-way deal, traded him to Oakland a half a year later for Rich Hill. Jose Peraza, acquired in that huge 3-team deal that brought Alex Wood to LA, traded to the Reds in that Montas deal.
Yeah.
Really the only, big prospect that they've acquired from another team and haven't traded to this point is Josiah Gray.
Yeah.
So based on how they've acted in the past, whether that's just a preference for their own guys or if those guys, just coincidentally happen to be the right guys to fit in those trades.
Interesting.
Maybe they feel the same way about Kendall Williams. I'm not saying they should move him or even that they will. They've just been, more willing to move guys who they didn't draft or sign, who they acquired from other teams, than some other guys, or at least they've done so with a degree of frequency that piques my interest.
Now, I'll end with one quick question before we move on to the draft. I mean, do you think the Dodger farm system is in a place where if they were to go out to make one or two, I mean, pretty sizable moves, let's say, and those trades are made up of kind of some depth from throughout the organization, like, are the Dodgers in a position where they could make a move like that without completely gutting the system? Or do you think, kind of like the opposite, like actually, no, it's a little barren at the moment?
I think the system is good. I mean, it certainly looks better than it did at the start of the year. They've had no major graduations. The biggest graduation has been Zach McKinstry.
Yeah.
And they've had a lot of guys move themselves up with their performance. Miguel Vargas, Keibert Ruiz, Andy Pages. I think that there's a clear top 7 right now, and those top 7 are all top 150 or so prospects in the game. Ruiz, Vargas, Pages, Bush, Miller, Pepio, and Gray. I think though that's a clear top 7, and I think those guys are all top 150 or so, across the entire game.
Yeah.
And if you might not have to move any of those guys, but I think you can move 1 or 2 and still be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. As always, Justin will be back to talk when trades happen. But let's get on to the draft. I know this is your baby in a way. This is a time of year that you love. So let me just give some headlines, and then we'll turn things over to you. The draft, as we said, incorporated into All-Star Week this year. We can argue about how stupid it is that it's on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, but that's another podcast. The first round begins Sunday, picks 1 through 36. Monday is day 2, rounds 2 through 10. Day 3, 11 through 20 on Tuesday. The Dodgers pick 29th. It's their only pick in the top 100. Their second pick is in round 3, number 101. They forfeited their second rounder in signing Trevor Bauer. Again, we don't need to rehash that. Results of all that is a pretty meager bonus pool this year. Teams have a budget to spend on their top 10 round picks. The Dodgers have the second lowest budget of anybody. Only the Astros are worse, who are still forfeiting picks because, they cheat. And the Dodgers have a total of about $4.7 million to spend on picks. They can exceed that by 4.99% with essentially no penalty. They will exceed that by about 4.99% if history tells us anything. And so last year, just for context, they had about an extra $1.2 million to spend. So, Justin, that's the backdrop. Let's start big picture, draft as a whole. Not Dodger-specific guys, but just at the top. If we want to engage in the draft on Sunday, who are the big names, the future superstars that are in this draft that the Dodgers don't have a chance with, but just names to know this year, but also moving forward?
So the story of this draft, I think, is about the prep shortstops. And there are 4 high school shortstops expected to go in the top 10. Marcelo Meyer, who's from San Diego area, he is right now probably the likeliest person to go number 1 overall to the Pirates. Okay. Jordan Lawler, who was the top guy for a while, is not anymore, but still very talented. Brady House, who I think you might be able to argue has the most upside. He's certainly the biggest physically of the 4 shortstops. And Khalil Watson, who's kind of the opposite of House. He's the smallest physically, but just, a guy who really hits the ball well for his size. He's gotten some comps to like Jazz Chisholm on the Marlins. He can drive the ball despite being only about 5'9" or so. So those 4 all expected to go in the top 10. Any of those 4 could realistically go in the top 5 or top 3.
Wow.
As well. It'll be interesting to see how it shapes out, but all 4 of those are top 10 guys, and they're kind of, or at least they've been up to this point, the story of this draft.
Yeah.
The other story has been, I think a lot of people know these 2 guys a lot more, are the 2 Vanderbilt pitchers, Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker.
That was my Vanderbilt VU in honor of my twin brother who went to Vanderbilt. Go Doors.
Yeah, Vandy boys. So those guys are obviously very famous. A lot of people know them. I think even, casual baseball fans who don't follow college baseball or the draft, might be aware of who they are just because of how much coverage they've gotten in the last 2 years. Deservedly so. For Rocker, it's been 3 years as well. Jack Leiter, I think most people agree he's the better pitcher. He's the guy who his floor is at Boston at number 4.
Okay.
It's questionable whether or not he gets there. There are some rumors that he and his family are trying to push himself down to Boston, but he might just be too talented to where the Pirates, the Rangers, or the Tigers 1, 2, and 3 might just say, sorry, we're taking you.
Yeah, figure it out later.
I think there's a legitimate risk he could go back to school because obviously, his dad was a major league pitcher, so the money issue is not there like it might be for other players and their families. And, he hasn't pitched in college that much. He had an abbreviated freshman year last year, and this is his first full season.
Yeah.
So he can definitely go back to school. But I don't think he will. I think he'll get pitched very highly. And Rocker, I think a lot of people who haven't been following the draft developments are going to be surprised when he falls, maybe to, pick 8, pick 9, pick 10. Now, he might not. He could get, picked, I think, as high as number 4. But I think more casual fans will be surprised because Kumar Rocker has been the big guy.
Yeah.
A lot of people will think, oh, well, he's certainly a top 3 pick. No, very unlikely at this point, probably somewhere between 5 and 10.
Okay.
And the top college position player is Henry Davis. He's a catcher from Louisville. Just really, really hits, even if he doesn't end up a catcher. And I think he will. I think most people think he will. He's going to hit. He's going to be a major league starter, with pretty decent degree of certainty. And then one more storyline that isn't necessarily solely about the Dodgers, but might play into their pick that I do want to talk about is the injured arms and the guys with injury risk. So there's 2 first-round arms, or guys who were first-rounders, underwent Tommy John. Now, one of them for sure going to be a first-rounder. The other one kind of up in the air. And that's Gunnar Hoglund and Jayden Hill. Gunnar Hoglund from Ole Miss, Jayden Hill from LSU. Gunnar Hoglund, I think he is the second most likely major league starting pitcher behind Jack Leiter.
Okay.
Very, very polished. Despite Tommy John, I still think he gets to the major leagues relatively quickly. Had an uptick in velocity this year, which was probably his biggest drawback entering the year. Maybe, I think there's like probably under 5% chance he gets to the Dodgers at pick 29. If he's there, there's certainly a good argument that he's the top player on the board. And we know the Dodgers haven't been afraid to go after guys with injury histories, specifically pitchers with Tommy John.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for Hill, who hasn't pitched a lot in college. The polish isn't there, but a plus, maybe double plus changeup, a ton of upside, and someone who I could definitely see the Dodgers going after. And then 2 guys with injury risks, some kind of injury questions with their arms, are Sam Bachman from Miami of Ohio and Gavin Williams from East Carolina. Both guys on talent, probably top 20. Decent chance they still both go in the top 20. Sam Bachman could even sneak to the top 10. But there have been some reports that some teams are a little concerned with their medical reports.
Got it.
And that could cause those guys to fall. You never know, especially with pitchers with injury question marks, how low they can fall. The Dodgers got Walker Buehler in 2015 because of those injury question marks.
Yeah.
And of course, that paid off in a big way. So those guys, I don't expect either of them to be around at pick 29, but if they are, probably one of the better selections, especially if it happens to be Sam Bachman.
Love it. Okay, well, along those lines, let me ask you, this might sound like one question, but I know it's actually 2. Who are the 3 to 5 guys that are realistic? I think you said you got 6, but who are the guys that are realistic who you, Justin, like at number 29 if you were the Dodgers and you were pulling the trigger? And then afterwards, I'm going to follow up and ask, throwing all that aside, hearing what you're hearing, reading the tea leaves, mock drafts, etc., do you have a prediction for the Dodgers? So we'll start with the guys you like. I think you said you had 6 names, maybe 6 guys that you like at number 29 who realistically could be there for the Dodgers.
Yeah, I had like about 6 guys in every demographic.
Okay. Oh, fair. That's
backs,
right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, talk to me through. That's right. Talk to me through college player versus high school player, position player versus pitcher if you're the Dodgers. So, take that kind of wherever you want to go. But at 29, do you have a sense, college versus high school, pitcher versus position player? Are there guys, you said you've got guys you like in each of those categories. So, kind of, I'll turn the floor over to you. You talk me through your thinking as you're processing through the Dodgers at 29.
Yeah. So this class overall, I think, I talked about the 2 Vanderbilt arms. I talked about the prep backs. The other kind of minor storyline in this class is the, relative weakness of the college backs compared to previous classes. There just aren't a lot of, great college hitters in this class. It's caused some guys to move up because of that lack of college hitters, and I'll touch on some of those guys as well. And there are a couple guys in the Dodgers range who I really like in that demographic.
Yeah.
First is Judd Fabian, Florida outfielder. He's currently the top player on my board. And my board is not a rankings list. So, it's not, Jack Leiter's on the board. Jack Leiter's not on the board because he's not falling to the Dodgers. The way that I've estimated it is if I think they have close to a 50% chance of being there at the pick, It's not an exact science, of course, it's just a guess. But based on what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, if they have close to a 50% chance, I leave them on. So Judd Fabian, great defender in center field, good power, a lot of plate discipline. The big concern with him has been contact.
Yeah.
He struck out a lot. He was striking out around 40%
Yikes.
at the start of the year.
Yikes.
His first 7 or 8 weeks really were not good. He went from a top 5 pick at the start of the year to a guy who wasn't even, I think if you had held the draft in late March, probably wouldn't have gone in the first round.
Wow.
He had a good second half, made some adjustments, especially with 2 strikes, eliminated his load with 2 strikes to help him strike out less. It did help to a degree, but the contact questions are always there. And I think for Dodger fans, you might hear that scouting report and go, okay, SEC outfielder, power, speed, defense, contact questions. That sounds a lot like Jaren Kendall.
Yeah.
And of course, that's going to scare some people because Jaren Kendall, at least to this point, hasn't panned out prospect-wise.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's a comparison. It's a comparison that's obvious, but it's not one that should necessarily dissuade the Dodgers from taking Judd Fabian. Because when you have a guy like that, a guy with legitimate top 5 upside, if he can hit enough, that is a guy that for the Dodgers, I think you go and you take a shot on. Because when you're picking at the end of the first round every year, you don't get a shot at a lot of those guys. And Judd Fabian is one of those guys. And that's for that reason, I don't think that the Jaren Kendall pick is a bad pick, even in hindsight, because that's a shot that you take. And I think for the same reasons, Judd Fabian would be one of the better picks they can make. Because if he does hit, he's a potential major league all-star with everything else that's there.
Fair.
Plate discipline there. He will walk a lot. The strikeouts are going to always be there. It's just how much can he limit it and how much contact can he make to get to his great power. The next guy I'll talk about is Trey Sweeney. He's a shortstop from Eastern Illinois. Obviously, you have some small school concerns there with the competition he's faced, but he's done everything he needed to do, playing at a school and in a conference like Eastern Illinois. I don't even know what conference they play in, to be honest. But obviously, small school.
You're not alone.
You're
not alone.
Yeah, he faced Jordan Wicks, who is arguably the draft's top left-handed pitcher, should go in the middle of the first round. And he had 2 hits. He had 2 balls above 105 miles per hour exit velocity. Wow. Just great barrel control. He walked about 2 times as many times as he struck out this year. Not just more walks than strikeouts, double.
Wow.
Double walks than strikeouts.
That's impressive.
He should stay at shortstop, but you might be able to move him around the infield a little bit. I know some people have been concerned. There's a lot of pre-pitch movement in his swing. He does a little bit of a bat waggle, but the dude hits. The dude just hits. And honestly, after what I've been reading the last couple of days, he might be a guy that I need to take off my board. He's currently at number 2, right below Fabian, because I'm starting to think that there's a chance he doesn't get to 29. He has a lot of interest from teams in the late teens and early 20s.
Got it.
So he's someone who I like a lot, but might not be there on draft day. The next 2 guys I mentioned, relatively weaker class for college bats. Some of the guys who were at the top didn't have great years, and that has pushed some guys up into the first round range. 2 of those guys, and we'll talk about them together because they're similar, Tyler Black out of Wright State and Connor Norby out of East Carolina. Mid-major second baseman, but offensive-oriented second baseman, 2 guys who can really, really hit. I definitely think that you can look at those guys and say, well, probably second base, maybe third base, maybe left field, but they'll hit. And I would have no problem taking either of those guys in the first round. They might come under slot too, which is another thing that I think is important to consider, especially with these college bats. And then one more guy I'll touch on is Matt Nelson. He's been connected to the Dodgers a little bit. He's Florida State's catcher. I have some concerns. He is older. He's 22 and a half, so he'll be 23 at the start of next year. He has a relatively flat bat path, which is good for hitting high velocity fastballs up in the zone, which is kind of where the game has been going. Very good for that. He's had some trouble with pitches lower in the zone, which, is definitely a concern once you get to the upper levels and they know how to pitch you. Could he stay at catcher? I think so, but I don't think it's a certainty. And I think he struck out a little more often than you would like for a guy, who's 22 playing against college competition. Now, if you're the Dodgers, you're looking at this guy, incredible power, incredible exit velocities, barrels the ball very consistently. You're the Dodgers, you're saying, well, if this guy hits enough, he's going to get to 30 homer power and maybe stick behind the plate, especially when you consider that, maybe 3 years from now, we're talking about robot umps in the major leagues. I can definitely see why teams and why the Dodgers specifically would like him. He's not a guy that I think I would go with in the first round. I think that there are definitely 29 players I would take over him.
Yeah.
But he's been connected to the Dodgers, so I did want to bring him up. If you have
Dodger,
any questions,
Dodger fans might have an aneurysm if the Dodgers draft another catcher. I mean, I know like the draft is so much different in baseball because of how far away it is, but it's just comical that it's like, and Farhan started doing this with the Giants too. Like it's clearly a strategy that Andrew Friedman and Farhan have talked about, but just perpetually drafting catchers. You know, like we said, we knew they had 3 elite catching prospects if you include Will Smith a year ago, and they go and spend a 4th round pick on Carson Taylor. So clearly they have a plan, as you said. You know, I default to these guys, but as you said, with the DH coming and robot umps, that kind of thing changes. But let's, take us to the pitching side of things, as well as some of the high school ranks. Some names, maybe just a handful of names that you've got there on either the high school side or pitching altogether that you like at 29.
Yeah, I guess just kind of naturally, I'll go to the college arms first. I brought up Gunnar Hoglund and Jayden Hill. I don't see Gunnar Hoglund getting there. If he does, it's really, really hard, I think, to not pick him.
Yeah.
You don't know who else is going to be there, but it would be tough to pass on him at 29. Jayden Hill, I like a lot of upside. His fastball has been more hittable than its mid-90s velocity would suggest. And that's not necessarily an easy fix. It's like, oh, well, he just throws a 4-seam fastball, or oh, he just changes his grip. Because when you start messing around with that, you might mess up his secondaries, which are good.
Yeah.
Above average slider, plus maybe double plus changeup, maybe one of the draft's better changeups, if not the best. So fastball is hittable, but the velocity, mid-90s velocity, up to 98, 99 gives you a really good base to start from. And, would it shock anyone if the Dodgers took a pitcher with a shorter track record and an injury history, but a ton of upside in the first round? I don't think it would surprise anyone. I talked about Sam Bachman and Gavin Williams. Ryan Cusick, big physical guy out of Wake Forest, I think would remind some people of the Bobby Miller pick last year, get him into the Dodgers system, see what we can do development-wise. Michael Mcgreevey out of UCSB. He's young. He's got 4 legit pitches. He looks like a starter. He's gotten some Shane Bieber comps because Shane Bieber also went to UCSB, was a 4th round pick, was a command over stuff guy who developed better stuff once he got to a major league development system. A lot of people, and it's not just the UCSB connection, a lot of people think that could be true for Michael Mcgreevey, and he's already got 4 solid pitches, so he looks like a major league starter. Kai Bush was actually mentioned today. I'll touch on him a little bit. He's a lefty from St. Mary's, Tony Gonsolin's school. ESPN linked him to the Dodgers. He was mocked to the Braves, but in the comments, Kylie McDaniel mentioned, Dodgers might be a little interested.
Okay.
So those are the college arms. And then we'll just run through prep backs and prep arms really quickly here, because I know we're kind of approaching the 45-minute mark soon. Peyton Stovall has been the guy that they've been connected to consistently over the last 2 months. He's a high school infielder from Louisiana. He's a shortstop, probably moves to second base. But one of the draft's better hit tools, you can project some power on there as he continues to grow. Good approach. And someone the Dodgers have been connected to both publicly and privately and could very easily be the pick. I think if I were to pick someone who is the most likely selection, I think it would have to be Stovall.
Okay.
Now, the next guy, I know a lot of people on Twitter have been talking about this. It's Maxwell Muncie, the infielder from Thousand Oaks, Southern California kid, has the same birthday as Major League Max Muncie. Just a lot of weird connections there.
Very weird.
But I think there's legit buzz with him and the Dodgers. So I do think there's a chance. There's also a chance he goes before the Dodgers pick. So he might not be there at 29. He does a little bit of everything well, which I think is something you like to see with those prep guys, because they do a little everything well. You can add on some power and you can just develop them into a good all-around player. It's a good profile, and I think I'd be happy with that pick too. Lonnie White Jr., who is a physical beast. He is committed to Penn State to play wide receiver.
Wow.
And if you've seen his football tape, he looks like an NFL wide receiver. So he hasn't played baseball as much as some of these other guys because he's focused on football as well. I think he's a pretty highly regarded football player. I don't know how he compares to baseball, but he's committed to Penn State, and that's a good football school.
Yeah.
He did perform well on the summer circuit against the top high school competition, which is pretty noteworthy. So I think that's a good thing. A few more guys. Wes Kath, a shortstop from Arizona, might end up at third base. Jay Allen, who's a 3-sport star from Florida, hit over power, but you can definitely project power on there. Dodgers have been connected to him a little bit. I could definitely see that pick he's, I think, a sleeper pick potentially. I know someone asked about that.
Yeah.
So I think if I were to pick a sleeper first-round pick, it'd be Jay Allen. A few more guys, Josh Baez, James Wood, Isaac Pacheco, Tyler Whitaker, all power over hit prep players.
Okay.
I'm less attracted to those guys because I think it's easier to grow into power than just grow into a hit tool, especially with what the Dodgers have done. But those guys should be options as well. And then Carson Williams, who's a two-way player, some buzz to the Dodgers, kind of split on whether teams like him on the mound or shortstop. I think he wants to play shortstop, and the Dodgers have been mocked. They've had him mocked to them a couple of times in different mock drafts. So another option. And running through some prep arms really quick, Chase Petty, big arm, up to 102 as a high schooler, which is rare. Violent athletic deliveries, given some people, reliever concerns. I think he starts. I think, the mechanics are actually really good. But I think there's definitely signability concerns if he were to fall to 29, how much money he would take to sign away from his Florida commitment. And that's why he's a little lower on my board than his talent would otherwise suggest. Gage Junk, who's a Southern California kid, one of my favorite pitchers in the draft. He's going to be taken, if he is taken, by a progressive analytically inclined team. His pitches are completely optimized for the modern game. He's only about 5'10", 5'11", but he releases the ball from a shorter release height, and his fastball, pretty flat, which gets a lot of misses up in the zone, which is where the game is right now. So I really see him being taken by a progressive, analytically inclined team. Maybe that's the Dodgers, maybe it's not, but I like him a lot. Frank Mazzucato and Anthony Solometto, two Northeast prep lefties who can really spin the ball. They've been a little bit connected to the Dodgers. Like maybe they go here. I don't think it happens, but maybe. Thatcher Hurd, another Southern California kid committed to UCLA, relatively newer to pitching. I think he tweeted out yesterday or the day before that he might be going to school, so maybe he's not available anymore. And Ben Caderna, Midwest arm, has also gotten some buzz toward the end of the first round. Not specifically the Dodgers, but another guy in that range.
Okay. Justin, that's why you're the best. You just followed off like 30 names at us with scouting reports on each of them. So that's awesome. All that said, let me summarize with this. Give me like the three guys at the top of your list. And again, what I appreciate about you is it's not like, here's the three best guys in the draft, but you're like, the way things are going to break, most likely to break, here's how my big board of guys potentially, theoretically, possibly available at 29. Give me the top 3 to 4 guys on your list. And again, this is not your prediction of what's going to happen. This is if you were in charge.
The top 3 on my board right now are Judd Fabian, Trey Sweeney, and Jayden Hill. And I also want to add, I mentioned a lot of names. If the Dodgers don't somehow pick one of those names, I'm going to be pretty disappointed because I feel like we covered most of the guys who are in that range, guys who they've been connected to. So I really hope that the first round pick is in there somewhere.
And then your prediction based on mock drafts, intel, etc., is the high school shortstop, it sounds like.
If I were to place a bet, I think it'd be Peyton Stovall is the most likely. Now, how likely, it's tough to say, especially because you don't know who's going to be there at 29. You don't know who's going to fall. You don't know what kind of deals they're looking for. Yeah. But I'd go Stovall.
Yeah, the baseball draft is so fascinating because even like if a guy who in the NFL draft is a guy who's like mocked in the top 10 falls to 29, it's a no-brainer. You just sign him. In baseball, it's like if a guy's mocked in the top 10 and then falls past like, let's say number 18, now all of a sudden it's, he's the best player there, but he's also the least likely to sign because he thought he was going to be getting $6 million and you can only offer him $2 million. So I understand what a fascinating exercise it is to try and navigate all that. Let's do this. We got just a couple minutes left. We got a bunch of questions. We'll rapid fire these as much as possible. Thanks to those.
Let's do it.
Thanks to those who sent these in. Justin's gracious enough to fire off with these. So you kind of mentioned this. Taylor on Twitter asked your favorite sleeper pick in the draft. You mentioned maybe a sleeper guy in the first round. Is there a guy in, let's say, after the first round that you kind of like that maybe you haven't heard as much buzz from other people about?
There's been a lot of buzz around this player. I got to go with a Hoosier, a pitcher, McCade Brown from Indiana. Took a big step forward this year. Kind of looked like a guy maybe who could push himself into the first round, middle of the year. Unlikely to happen now. He might not get to the Dodgers' third round pick, but if he does, he'd be one of my top guys there.
Okay. Kevin wants to know, the Dodgers obviously forfeited their second round pick by going out and signing Trevor Bauer. At the time, hey, it is what it is. Now we're about to draft. You're about to experience the missed second round pick. How big of a deal is that to be without a second round pick?
It's certainly not fun for me because I like to do that research, and there's a pretty big swath of guys who aren't first round guys, but aren't necessarily going to fall to the end of the third
Yeah.
round where the Dodgers next pick is. So those guys are kind of just not going to happen. But I think you look at the Dodgers' last few second round picks: Landon Knack, Jimmy Lewis, Mitch White,
Yeah.
Morgan Cooper, and Michael Grove. Those are the Dodgers' last 5 second round picks. And you to take one of them out of the Dodgers system, you don't miss a whole lot. It does, affect how they plan and do the draft strategy wise, under slot, over slot guys where they float a prep player later on in the draft. It does affect things like that. But, overall, it's not a huge loss.
Yeah.
In the second round.
Knack being the perfect example, a guy they went and got because theoretically they could get him either at slot or under slot. I don't remember what he signed for, but it was a strategy pick as much as obviously now it's turned out and he's really good. So you kind of touch on this. AC wants to know, these are all coming from Twitter. How many high school players do you see the Dodgers taking this year? And then a follow-up is, are there any guys with signability issues that the Dodgers might take a chance on? It's hard to tackle the signability thing at pick number 29, I imagine, but what do you think about high schoolers connected to the Dodgers?
I think they get 2, maybe 3. I don't see more than 3 because of the limited draft. And because so many college players went back to school last year because of the shortened draft, rounds 5 to 15 are going to have a lot more college depth than they normally would in other years. So 2, maybe 3 would be my answer. Signability. A guy I didn't mention was Bubba Chandler. Two-way player, probably more of a pitcher from Georgia. He's committed to Clemson as a quarterback.
Wow.
So signability concerns there for sure. Anytime you have, a big football commitment like that, and consider the new NIL rules.
Yeah.
If he's Clemson's quarterback, he can make some money in college now. So it's not just turn down the money and then don't make any for 3 years.
Yeah. Kevin asks, looking back on the past 5 years, is there a biggest draft day regret that you have for the Dodgers? Is it a guy like Ginn who who didn't sign? Is it Kendall who seems to be a bust? Do you have a biggest draft day regret in the last 5 years?
So I mentioned earlier, not Jaron Kendall. I think that's a pick you take 10 times out of 10. Upside was super high. You take him, you hope the hit tool develops, and you might have a 4 or 5 win player on your hands who can play center field. So I don't regret that one. I don't think I would understand if they do, but I don't. I think it's a good pick. JT Ginn, just because of who went after him immediately, Shane McClanahan from the Rays, who we actually saw in the World Series last year, firing 101 with a wipeout slider from the left side. That's tough. Reliever, starter, that's tough to miss out on. And he was the guy that I was hoping for at that pick 3 years ago. And Jackson Kowar of the Royals, also top 100 pitching prospect, made his major league debut, didn't do too well, was picked immediately after McClanahan. So I think the JT Ginn pick. The other side of it is they got an extra pick the year later, used it to take Michael Busch, who's now a top 100 prospect, one of the better prospects in the system. So 2 sides to that coin.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do one last one here. This has been great. We got a lot of questions, so we'll save some of these. Justin and I are going to be doing some post-draft content throughout the week. So any ones we don't get to today, we'll fire some off. This is a good one. Will asks, are you worried about Cody Hosey's start? This is a guy that Dodger fans were high on. Was a big topic of conversation in the Justin Turner lead up to him signing an extension. Seems to be I shouldn't say overly, has been disappointing. I would say to most people, are you concerned?
I mean, look, it's never good when a guy is not performing.
Yeah.
A guy not hitting is never a good thing, of course. Now he's been injured. He's been on the IL for a while. He just played in his first rehab game in Arizona at Camelback Ranch last night. I think with him, there's a couple of things. There's the jump to AA, because even though he was at the alternate site last year, he only had a few games at High A, a few games at Camelback Ranch in his first pro season. He just hasn't had a lot of game action. And so I think that there needs to be some kind of nuance or a measured response here that takes that into account.
Yeah.
Now, he's not a big exit velocity guy. He's a guy who, is an athletic third baseman who, gets the ball and drives the ball because of his size and because of his rotational ability. So I haven't, there just isn't enough here for me to be too concerned. Obviously, like I said, not good that he wasn't hitting.
Yeah.
I think his weighted runs created plus was like 27,
Oof.
which is what pitchers look like in the major leagues. But I don't think that there's this wide concern. I don't think he's a guy that they trade because of where his value is right now in relation to what it could be in his upside. So I don't see him being traded. or at least if he is, I think that would be pretty telling.
Yeah.
So worried, kind of. He'll be 24 in a few days, so that's not good either. He's a little on the older side. But yeah, let him get back, let him get healthy, and then let's see what happens.
Yeah, he wouldn't be the first guy to go through a stretch like he's going through currently, and then to sort of, 12 months later look back and his prospect stock is exactly where you had hoped it would have been anyway. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. So anyways, well, that's Justin Lorber. I'm Jeff Spiegel. Make sure you're following Justin at Future Dodgers. Check out his website, futuredodgers.com. He'll have a ton of great draft content. As I said, we're still working out the details of when, but we will have a video breaking down the Dodgers' first-round pick, whether that's Sunday night or Monday morning. Stay tuned for that, and then we'll probably get a second show in once the second and third day of the draft are completed, breaking it all down. As I said, we'll get to some of these questions. If you've got more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Find one of us on Twitter, and we'll make sure to get those in. Justin, we appreciate your time. Enjoy. I know this is one of your favorite stretches of the year, so enjoy the draft, and we'll talk to you either Sunday or Monday.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll talk soon.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.